The old playbook was pretty straightforward. Business was business, and businesses should, therefore, stick to business and keep their nose out of everything else. Amid the craziness of 2020, however, more and more brands are bucking this historical safety zone and engaging with the social issues of the day. The question is whether that's a strategy that will propel them to the front of the pack or doom them to suffer under withering criticism and lost sales. On today's The Digital Experience Revolution, we're going to find out. All right, welcome to The Digital Experience Revolution. I am Charles Araujo.
And I'm Dr. Frank Renito.
We're both with the Institute for Digital Transformation, and we are going to just dive into today's trend line. And as you might have got from the opening, brands engaging in social action. So what are we watching in terms of the news? And again, if you're not following this or if you're not used to this yet, all of the links will be in the show notes. But there were a couple of really fascinating ones, right? First, Twitter goes out and starts for the first time flagging President Trump's tweets. And of course, uproar ensued. And then amid all of the George Floyd protests, we saw there's an issue of or an article in Variety talking about how entertainment organizations around the world were going dark to support the protests. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, HBO, Viacom, I think. I mean, just crazy, the number of organizations. But of course, this isn't new. In fact, there's a long history, at least with some organizations doing this. Nike, most recently, with a pretty controversial thing where they stood up and provocatively endorsed or signed an endorsement deal with Colin Kaepernick long after all of this, and he'd been sort of derided. And so the big question here, and I guess, Frank, I want to kind of get your take, is are we reaching this tipping point where suddenly brands need to be engaging socially, or is this just a momentary blip?
No, I think we are realizing that if you watched last week's show, we talked about the whole freedom of speech issue and First Amendment. And, the private companies have a lot of leeway here. They can limit or open really as much as they can or as much as they want. So, the idea of these companies doing that is going to obviously continue because I think we're all, it doesn't matter what company you are a social company. All right? It doesn't matter if you're a technology company or a non-technology company. And I think we talked a little bit about the idea that my example that I had to have heating and HVAC work done on my home. I interacted with the company purely on social media. Their website scheduled it. They texted me when they were coming. I had very little human interaction. They were really close to their customer. Now, this is not a tech company. A guy comes to the door who's going to work on my furnace. So this isn't a tech company. So I think this is only going to continue. And obviously the events of 2020, we talked about this in another conversation, the events of 2020 with the pandemic, people being inside, pent up desire to get out and do stuff. So I think all these confluences of things are propelling it. And this is just going to continue, in my opinion.
I think it's interesting, this idea of everyone being a social company, of having these type of interactions. And, clearly when social media first hit, that was sort of a thing. And it sort of didn't really materialize, at least in, I think, the way we sort of thought about it. Mm-hmm. But here's what I think is interesting about what you said, is that not only are our interactions increasingly digital, but I think the reason this is shifting in my mind is that, unlike in the past, companies now have organizations now have a much greater understanding of their customers. And it all comes back down to data, right? When I have this much data about my customers and I understand how they interact, not only with the brand, but then by looking at things like social media, by looking at things like Reddit or wherever they're engaging, and I'm able to kind of pull all this intelligence together, I start getting a pretty good handle on what is actually important to my customer. And as we talked about last week in the Tim Ferriss and the Marie Forleo kind of incident, that customer is likewise engaging with our brands now in a way where they're expecting that level of engagement. And so I agree with you that this is not a blip, that this is something we're going to continue to see, because I think our customers are now expecting that intimacy, that empathy. They're starting to pick and choose who they do business with by that much deeper alignment, which goes back to the same thing we've been talking about forever now, which is the fact that it all comes down to this entire journey, and that people are not engaging on a transactional level nearly as much anymore. And I think that's a trend that's just
I alluded to it in a previous show, the idea of the Kano model, where, hey, today, when I engaged in that HVAC company and I engaged totally on social on their website, it was an exciter for me. So if you plot that on a Kano, hey, that's pretty cool. But probably, to your point, over time, those kinds of interactions are going to become expected. And as such, they'll fall below the line, so to speak, as basal. If I have to make a call, get put on hold, talk to a customer service representative, I'm gonna hang up. I'm gonna go to somebody's website, schedule a call, get an electronic confirmation, get put on their calendar, blah, blah, blah. And that's going to become expected. And that kind of customer intimacy is going to move down the Kano model to the basal functionality. And if you don't provide that, you're not getting that business.
Yeah, I think we're getting very close to that point already, frankly. Yes. All right, well, let's move on to our tech notes and the companies that we're talking to that we are finding doing fascinating, interesting, and disruptive things in the marketplace, and that you, if you're an enterprise leader, should be paying attention to. The first one we're going to talk about is a company called KissFlow. And here's what I like about what they're doing. So they're trying to introduce what they call the digital workplace. And they started out as a process management or a process automation type company. And they sort of evolved because they had this aha moment. They realized that, you know, when we actually work in an organization, for most of us, that we don't work in one dimension, right? We don't just do process, right? We don't just do work on a project. We're doing all these things all at once. And they found that was sort of the gap, that their customers were looking for a system that would allow them to manage all of their work, right? Whether that was structured or unstructured. And so they sort of broke that down into three big categories, being process type work, project type work, and case type work. Or you can think of this as the ongoing activities that are happening all the time. The projects are sort of the one-time activities. They may last for a while, but they have a starting and end point. And then the case type work is, you know, the exceptions. Hey, something is broken, there's a problem, there's an issue. So that might be a customer support issue, might be a traditional service desk type issue. That we need all three of these, and that they also come in both structured and unstructured formats. And so this idea of collaboration technology or collaborational work in the middle of it, and that their whole pitch is to bring it all together in a unified, integrated platform. Because when we're talking pre-show, you know, Frank, you said, well, but don't all these technologies already exist? Well, they do.
Why are you stealing my thunder? I was going to.
I know. But you know, but they brought them all together in this unified, integrated thing, and then add this layer of automation to it. So I think it's really cool stuff. I think it's very, very much needed, and so I'm kind of excited to see where they go, because they're just sort of evolving to this now.
Yeah, as we talked pre-show, I asked the rhetorical, intellectual question of, you know, trying to be all things to all people. Does that dilute your functionality so that if somebody needs something specific, they're not going to look to you? But, you know, our conversation went to, well, maybe we're just moving to a world of agility, and that kind of structured and unstructured work and collaboration is really what's needed, more than the deep depths of a high-end project management tool that you know, typically is used for, you know, shipbuilding, so to speak. So, you know, maybe that's where we're going.
I think it's an interesting question. I mean, so first of all, I think this is a battle or a question we've been trying to answer for a long time, right? There's always been this kind of question over these very targeted point solutions that are focused on a single problem versus these integrated suites that try to do it all. But then it's always been the argument, right? The argument you just made is, but are you giving up too much because
Right.
of that you can't be the master of all trades kind of a thing. To your point, as we were talking about, I think right now, at least where I'm landing, is that integration and unification wins out because of the need for agility over the deep functionality. And you mentioned shipbuilding, and we were chatting a little bit about this pre. I think about even cruise lines, right? Cruise lines are now, and if you talk about a massive product with a huge pipeline to get built, right? You would think, as you mentioned, right, perfect for a traditional project management type approach.
Right.
But some of these cruise lines, they're innovating, and their go-to-market strategy, what is differentiating them in the market, is that they can bring out new ships faster with the latest gizmos and water parks or theme parks on top of their cruise ships or whatever,
Right.
faster than their competition, and that demands agility. So I think it's a fair question. I don't know the answer. I think there's probably cases where, hey, I need that sort of deep functionality that an integrated suite maybe can't
Right.
bring, but I think it's an interesting
It's
point.
an interesting question, and perhaps we're seeing the evolution of the ability to be agile in traditionally non-agile disciplines. So we'll see how.
Places where we might not even have looked at it. And so, you say that made me think one other thing, that when I was talking to the folks at KissFlow, one of the things that I enjoyed was, and they're actually not really saying much of this, so this is my interpretation of it, but what I saw was that there's some of the groundwork capabilities that start putting us on this road to the future of work. And what I mean by that is to the self-organizational type of future of work, where when I suddenly have the ability to bring all my work together and add this collaboration layer on top of it, then suddenly I start having the flexibility to organize that on my own and to come up. So I think, they're not all the way there. There's some pieces that would be necessary for that. But I think this is one of those steps forward that we're going to need to move organizations down that road. So interesting stuff. Okay, so the second company is a name that I'm going to just warn everyone full on. I can't say their name. I keep trying. I think I have it right, but I'm probably still going to mess it up. And Frank's going to probably try to correct me, although we're not sure if he's right either. So the way I think I say it is Coquito. Coquito. That's how
I think that's right. As distinct, and I'll get into the discussion in a bit. But yes, I think that's correct.
Okay, so and I've actually, despite not being able to say the name, I've been talking about this company for a while, because when I first ran into them a few years ago, I was so taken by their technology and more than anything, how they were applying it. That they've been an organization that I've been talking about for a while. But so here's what they do. They claim that, or their view of it is that we're living in what they call the empathy economy. And just a little sidebar, I loved that phrase so much that I told them flat out, and I'm putting it on the record here, that I'm going to steal it. So I'm right here officially giving them credit for it, but I'm going to blatantly steal this term because I love it, right? This idea of and so their idea of the empathy economy is one in which that the human connection is at the center of value creation. And I mean, anyone who's followed my work, Frank, I cannot agree with that more. And here's how they're applying it, or what it means for them, is that they believe that in most modern enterprises, that because that human connection is so important, it's actually the call center that becomes the sort of the last vestige of that place, right? When all else fails and all of the digital whiz bang technologies have gone away, you pick up the phone in desperation so you can talk to a live human, right? Yeah. And what they do is that they've got a piece of technology that basically listens into that call in real time and gives the agent cues. They call themselves an AI coaching and augmented emotional intelligence tool. So the idea is it's saying, hey, this customer sounds pretty frustrated, or hey, you're talking too fast, or hey, you've been talking too long, you might want to take a break. And these might not be their actual prompts, but that's the idea, right? It's right. Giving, it's sort of like having somebody listen in and giving that real-time feedback. And here's why they say it's so important, is that these agents, while they are vital in their view of it, and I would agree, they get burned out. They get tired. They're being carpet bombed, especially right now with everything going on. and that they are struggling. And so this is giving them this much needed sort of nudge, help in a very
Uh,
positive way to, unleash that empathy and humanity that it's all about. So
yeah, and I agree with you. However, just a little caveat: according to Merriam-Webster, there's a word called cogito, which is the philosophical principle that one's existence is demonstrated by the fact that one thinks. So it's no coincidence that they borrowed that those names are pronounced differently but spelled the same. Where I was going, what I wanted to chat a little bit about is, obviously you talk about creativity, empathy, and imagination is inherently human, and now we have a system that can give empathy cues to a human. How soon is it before we can replace one of those inherently human characteristics? So I can actually, maybe I can take the person out of it, and instead of just giving empathy cues, I can have pre-recorded voices or digital voices pulled from a library, and according to the empathy requirement, just have, could you please, I understand you're calling about such and such. Could you, you know, how
oh,
soon
Frank, now
before
I see why
empathy
you're
is
so afraid
replaced?
of the future. Okay, I get it. So here's the deal. So clearly I don't think anyway that's where this company is trying to go. And here's why I think is that empathy at its core is about having shared experiences, or at least being able to put yourself into a mental state where you are imagining a shared experience. Because some cases we don't have that same base, right? So, but attempting to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes to share in that experience and therefore share what they're feeling, and therefore respond empathetically as a result. And here's the deal. By definition, a machine can't be empathetic because can never have those same experiences. The best we're ever going to get is a facsimile of empathy. And who the heck wants that,
But
really?
the listener doesn't know that.
But they do, unless we're going to try to fool them to thinking they're talking to a human. And, I don't want to be the CEO of that company when your
Right.
customers figure out
Well,
that you've been lying to them.
yeah, we could do a whole panel discussion on this,
Right,
and
right.
I don't want to do that. But yeah,
Yeah. But I do think your point is well taken, and I actually, one of the reasons that I do like what this company is doing so much is that they understand that they totally get that that there's
mm,
this fine line, and that they have to help people and organizations walk it, to strike this balance point of using this power for good and not evil, right? To use it, and again, I think they're doing amazing work of, seriously, because you could easily use this to be manipulative,
yes,
and
you
they're
could.
not, right? But here's the other thing that I like is it's not just the real time. They also collect this data. So they've now analyzed over 4 million calls. They collect all this data, that's happening in real time, and they provide it in the form of what they call insights to the management team that they then use to coach, the agents, right? They use it both for things like,
Right.
hey, at the hour 6, this person always has a rougher segment, so maybe we need to look at altering shifts or changing things around. So
That's
they're
an
able to do it that way,
incredibly valuable
right?
application.
Because I think the challenge is that most call centers have focused almost exclusively on these very transactionally driven data points. And what I love about this is now suddenly we've got a data set that's all focused on the emotional intelligence, on the empathy factor.
Right.
And I think that's a game changer. So it's really, really cool stuff. All right. So with that, let's switch gears, and I want to kind of kick this over to you, Frank. So, as we always do at the end of every show, where do you see all of this, right? At the end of the day, this is always about the research we're doing on the digital experience supply chain and how it all fits together. So, how are you seeing all of what we just talked about applying to our research?
Yeah, what I'm seeing here is, again, we go to what are the capabilities needed for the digital experience supply chain. And so what I'm seeing here is the trend to, or the need for companies, firms, whether you're a tech company or a non-tech company, to drive the EQ or emotional intelligence capability down to the person or persons or entities that directly relate to the customer. So that in this case, we were talking about call center and people talking directly to the customer. How do we provide that capability, or how do companies get the capability of emotional intelligence, or EQ, down to the level of first response? These are first responders basically for the customer. And that's the capability that I think we're seeing in our research.
I think it's interesting. Our research, we talk about 4 macro business capabilities or enablers. We talk about experience creation and curation, experience management and monitoring, business and operating model transformation, and the future of work or work model transformation. And what I think is interesting and inherent in all of those is that it's easy to whitewash it. It's easy to sort of miss the boat, right? And talk about the creating and creating an experience, and then have that devolve into this manipulative or simply transactional kind of element of it. And ultimately, it's not going to work, because the customers, as we've been talking about in our trend line conversation, see right through that. But they're looking for deep, meaningful engagement with the companies they're spending their money with. But I think what's interesting is the point you brought up is dead on, is that if I'm going to create that type of meaningful engagement, I need to push the ability to engage empathetically using emotional intelligence, right, deep into the organization and as close to the front line as I can. And what I think is interesting is, while these 2 companies, Kissflow and Coquito, whatever, are approaching it very, very differently, they're actually on the same sort of banner here, right? Is that whether it's about managing the work and therefore automating that work so that I can spend more time with my customer, or make that a more, or the employee for that matter, a more seamless type transaction, or whether it's very specific to what Cogito's doing, they're both part of the same motion here. And I think that that's what organizations are going to have to get their head around, is they really go down this road in a meaningful way.
And not necessarily more time with the customer or employee, is that the time you spend is high quality time.
Yeah, dead on. Well, with that, as usual, we are out of time, and it always goes so fast. I just don't understand how that just poof, it goes. But we need to wrap it up. So thank you again for joining us for the Digital Experience Revolution. Hope you enjoyed it, and tune in next week. For Dr. Frank Granito, I am Charles Arajo, and we will see you next week.